Hello everyone, welcome to the India Story. And as you can see, the India Story this week comes to you from the city of London. A city all dressed up, a city all decked up for the big coronation. The coronation of King Charles as the monarch of the UK, of the United Kingdom. I'm Vikram Chandra, and on this show we are going to be discussing the coronation. We're going to be discussing what it means for India, if anything. How should Indians be reacting to this entire coronation, to the monarchy, to Britain itself, of course 75 years after independence. We're going to be taking a look at other subjects, like, for example, you know that little diamond, the Kohinoor, which is in the Tower of London, right behind me there somewhere. We're going to be discussing the Kohinoor as well, and we have special guests for you. Joining us to discuss the Kohinoor is going to be Brilliant Dalrymple, but we also have a very special guest for you, Amish, one of India's best-known authors. He is here as the head of the Nehru Centre, of course, but also the Minister for Education and Culture. And we're going to be talking to him about the entire history, the entire relationship of India and Britain, and India and the monarchy, and therefore what should Indians be making of the entire coronation. We're also going to be talking to Zaki Cooper, who's been the Assistant Press Secretary to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, and to help us understand and analyze and discuss and figure out the entire coronation. Great pleasure to welcome my friend, a journalist, one of somebody who really understands India, understands Britain, understands the relationship between the two, Andrew Whitehead. Andrew, it's such a pleasure. We've spoken to you so often when you were in India. It's good to be talking to you here. Well, it's a nice view, isn't it, behind us?
It is, Vikram. It's fantastic. You've got the Tower of London, you've got Tower Bridge, you've got the skyscrapers of the City of London. The skies are a little grey, and that's a little bit of a warning sign.
It helps with the shooting sometimes. But
okay.
I'm going to be asking you about the coronation, what to look at in the coronation. But before I do any of that with Andrew and I take you to all of our other guests, let's quickly take you through the major headlines that you should be tracking.
India's Supreme Court closed women wrestlers' plea after police registered an FIR against WFI chief Brij Bhushan on sexual harassment complaint. Wrestlers say they respect the top court's order, but protest against Bhushan will continue. Internet services snapped in Manipur after violence escalated between the majority Meitei community and the tribals on the 3rd of May over constitutional demands. Army says situation under control even as neighboring states ramp up rescue efforts.
Well, let's just try and understand what exactly is going to be happening at the coronation, and who better to tell us than Zaki Cooper, who was former Assistant Press Secretary to Her Majesty the Queen. Zaki, when was that, 2009 to 12?
That's correct, yeah.
So tell us a little bit about this. What's going to be happening? I mean, I see London's already starting to look quite excited. This is the more picturesque part of London, I guess, but Westminster Abbey just further up the river. What's going to be happening tomorrow?
Well, we are on the eve of this huge event, the King and Queen's coronation. We obviously haven't had a coronation for 70 years, since the coronation in 1953 of the late Queen Elizabeth II. And we're going to have this huge event in Westminster Abbey tomorrow, a service presided over by the Archbishop of Canterbury, which will take 2 hours approximately. And there are 2,200 people who are lucky enough to have been invited to the Abbey, and that will include representatives from 203 countries, which of course includes India. And the King and Queen will get there by carriage, and they will depart by carriage and then go back to Buckingham Palace and appear on the balcony, and we expect thousands and thousands of people to line the Mall outside Buckingham Palace to greet the King and Queen after their coronation.
So, you know, there have actually been 3 pretty major events, right? Haven't there been in the last year? Platinum Jubilee, then of course Her Majesty's funeral, and now the coronation. A bit unusual. There must be really stretched at Buckingham Palace?
Well, you're absolutely right. This is almost an unprecedented situation where we've had these three mega royal events. I mean, the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, her remarkable 70 years as Queen, it had never been done before by any British monarch in 1,000 years of history. And then a few months later, sadly, we had the death of the much-loved monarch, the Queen, and her funeral, which was going to be a huge event, a global television audience of 4 billion people. And now moving to the King's coronation. He's been king for 8 months. And of course, he becomes king immediately on the death of his mother, the Queen. But this is the religious ceremony sort of rubber stamping his role as the new monarch.
How much excitement are you sensing in London? Because let's face it, the royal family has been subject to some debate. Her Majesty the Queen was, without a doubt, really, really popular, one of the most popular global leaders. How much excitement are you sensing?
Well, I'm sensing that it's building, absolutely. I mean, I think people are not used to a coronation, whereas we've had lots of jubilees. The Queen celebrated 4 jubilees. The coronation is a somewhat...
There's been weddings, there have been children, all of that in the royal family, but not a coronation.
That's right.
In most people's lifetime.
Absolutely right. You have to be the same age as the King, who's 74 or older, to remember the last coronation. He was, I think, 4 years old at his mother's coronation. So for the majority of the population, they will not remember a coronation. So it's a new thing for most people in the country. But definitely, I think the anticipation is building, and I think it's going to be a huge celebration over the weekend.
On June 2nd, 1953, 27 million people in the UK alone gathered on their TV sets to watch Elizabeth Alexandra Mary crown Queen of England in a ceremony that lasted for almost 4 hours. She was just 27 years old at the time. Now, 70 years later, it's her son's turn. On 6th of May, Charles Philip Arthur George will be, at 74, the oldest monarch ever crowned in a grand Westminster Abbey ceremony that dates back to the 11th century. Coronation plans, codenamed Operation Golden Orb, being planned for years, called for shorter formalities this time. The coronation is taking place 8 months after the Queen's death. A royal procession on May 6th will take the King and the Queen consort from Buckingham Palace in central London to Westminster Abbey, where Charles will be crowned by the Archbishop of Canterbury, the highest-ranking cleric in the Church of England. The monarch will be crowned alongside his wife, Queen Consort Camilla. The King will be anointed with the holy oil and receive the sovereign's orb, coronation ring and scepter. He will then be crowned with the St. Edward's crown and blessed during the ceremony. For the moment of crowning, he will sit on the same chair which has been used for centuries. After the service, the King will lead the coronation procession and return to Buckingham Palace along the same route. He will be joined by other members of the royal family and then appear on the palace balcony with the royal family members. While the world has changed a lot since the last coronation in 1953, King Charles' coronation will be a pageant steeped in tradition, as the service has largely remained the same for over 1,000 years.
Well, Andrew Whitehead, who's here with us. Andrew, talk to us a little bit about the importance of the coronation, about the importance of the spectacle.
It's pomp, it's pageantry, it's ceremonial, it's renewal. It's the first coronation we've had for 70 years. It was June 1953 when Queen Elizabeth had her coronation. And I think for the crown, it is enormously important, and King Charles wants to present himself as a monarch for a new era. And I think that's really quite difficult because, of course, he's 74. So if he's a monarch for our age, well, basically his age, arguably, was a generation or more ago. So there's a real tension there between about being modern and being contemporary and being traditional and full of pageant and ceremonial.
So when you're looking at this from the point of view of, judging the reaction of all Britons, when it came to Queen Elizabeth, and I've been saying it all my shows, she almost transcended everything, right? She had that ability to unify.
I think that's right.
King Charles may or may not get that same deference. The rest of the family certainly doesn't. If you look at the popularity, for example, of Harry and Meghan out here in Britain, I think Prince Andrew is lower, which is not saying much.
The Queen was universally admired and respected, even by people who didn't have a lot of time for the idea of a hereditary head of state. King Charles, he's acknowledged to be a decent guy. He works hard, he strives hard. He doesn't have the same personal standing as his mother did. So I don't think the monarchy is in any real danger, but if you look at the opinion polls, although the majority want the monarchy to remain and are happy with a hereditary head of state, among under 25s, the situation is reversed.
But I'm going to just pause this conversation for a minute, and before I start looking again at the Tower of London and thinking about the Kohinoor with William Dalrymple, and you know what his views on this are going to be. Let's just try and understand, from the point of view of Indians who are watching this, after all, the show is the India story, it's about the rise of India on the global stage. What should Indians be making about this? Because obviously, India has got its own history when it comes to Britain, and we wouldn't have been talking about the India story or the rise of India if the British Raj hadn't existed, Andrew, and I guess you probably agree with me.
I do.
India had probably risen already at that time if it wasn't for the Raj, which happened. But who better to ask that question to than Amish, who's India's top author, also somebody who's the minister here for culture and for education. I got a chance to catch up with him just a short while back, and I asked him, how should Indians be thinking about the coronation? Well, if you have to come to London to talk about the coronation and what all of us in India should be thinking about the coronation, who better to talk to than Amish? He's not just one of India's best authors, he's also the minister here at the High Commission for Culture and for Education. And you also know more about Indian history than virtually anybody else, I know. So Amish, multiple hats. And which hat are you going to be? Author hat, diplomat hat, minister for culture hat?
I cannot ignore the diplomatic hat. I am in London, so I will be a little careful.
You have to be a little careful. You have to be diplomatic. At the end of the day, you are a diplomat. Now look at this. Look at these as symbols of,
Wellington Arch. That's actually Nike on top. So the goddess of victory, the ancient Greco-Roman goddess of victory. Yeah.
So when you're talking about victory, that's what tomorrow's all about, right? The coronation is all about pageantry, it's all about celebrating the monarchy, it's all about celebrating British pride. How should we as Indians be thinking about all this?
Look, if I have to think about it honestly, right? I can appreciate the way the British would look at it. I can understand that. But look, we are Indians, we can be pragmatic and we can hold multiple truths in our own mind. So, there's often this talk about a shared history. The shared history from the Indian perspective is not positive, actually, to be honest. But we are pragmatic. So we are willing to look ahead, just put that on the side and look to the future. And again, we are Indians. We are capable of managing multiple truths. So we can see that from the British perspective, of course, the royalty is extremely important. Of course, their traditions are important. It may not necessarily be that important for us, but we will respect their truth.
No, obviously, you'll be here, we'll celebrate the whole thing. It's like for the British, they're still like, okay, maybe we'll have to see how King Charles, fares. The monarchy has been popular in Britain a lot because of Queen Elizabeth also. She was one of the most popular global leaders that we've seen in the last 60, 70 years.
No doubt.
Now, how King Charles will really resonate with that will have to be seen. But
if I may add though, King Charles has actually been extremely enthusiastic about things which are actually important to Indians. So for example, of Ayurveda, of yoga, and even when he was a prince, right? The man formerly known as Prince. He was extremely enthusiastic about Ayurveda, about traditional medicines, about yoga, about environmentalism, issues that are important to us Indians. And I think that may endear him to many Indians.
There's been some signs also that maybe a little bit more inclusivity, a little more sensitivity. For example, I'm going to be talking to William Dalrymple in a few minutes about the Kohinoor, right? Where's the Kohinoor? Can we please get it back? It won't be a major part of the celebration. Some signs that recognizing that Britain is a more multicultural, multi-ethnic country. Do you think he's going to move in that direction?
I think movements from there are happening already. But look, real change happens over time, right? The earth rotates under your feet. You may not notice it, but actually over time it moves huge distances. Think about it, what's actually happening in the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth began as, when the empire ended. Or rather, actually the Commonwealth began when the empire was still there. And then many other countries got added to it. But for the first time in the history of the Commonwealth, the largest economy in the Commonwealth is not the UK anymore, it's India, right? In another 3-4 years, India's economic size will be twice that of the UK. In another 9-10 years, India's economic size will be bigger than the rest of the Commonwealth combined, right? How will this play out in how relations happen? That's something to be seen.
And that actually brings me to the nub of the history, right? Because what you're describing, it sounds great. India has overtaken Britain, and India is going to be larger than the rest of the Commonwealth put together and the rest of it. But let's not forget, Amish, that's the way it used to be till the British came. That's the way it used to be. India had 25%, 30% of world GDP, the richest country in the world, one of the most powerful manufacturing forces in the world at that time. What you're describing is the way it was till the British came, and that's when India became poor. I know
Yes,
you have
you're
to
right.
answer that
And at this
diplomatically.
time, I'll put my diplomatic hat on.
Yeah.
The thing
Answer
is this,
that diplomatically, but the essence of what I've said is true, right?
look, the thing is this, that is there pain in our history? Of course there is, and we must speak honestly of that. And Indians do now, right? But another way of looking at it is, what do we do now? I think one of the things I like about the new India right now is we are pragmatic, and we have that approach of charai keep walking, right? Look ahead. What are the opportunities for partnership with the UK? And there are actually opportunities. Like I said earlier, there's no need to pretend that that shared history was positive. It wasn't, obviously, not from our side, right? But we can be pragmatic, look to the future, and there are benefits of the partnership to both countries. We must speak of the past, honestly, no doubt, right? But we don't need to be prisoners of the past. We don't need to carry that hatred into
You've
today.
become a really good diplomat.
Thank you.
You've become a very, very good diplomat. That was so well worded. Very diplomatic. In fact, Humphrey Appleby would have been proud of you.
I don't know if that's a compliment or what.
No, in a very diplomat. Now, I don't have to be diplomatic. I'm a journalist, right? So at the end of the day, I don't have to be diplomatic about it. So, look, let's face it. I think there's certainly there is a cultural attachment, I think, to Britain now. Cricket, Enid Blyton, many of us have studied out here. I love it here in London. It's beautiful. I feel very much at home. That's the positive part. There is certainly a cultural bond, which I'm sure you're highlighting in your capacity of Minister, Culture and Education. But Shashi, when he was here and he was talking about reparations and saying, can we get an apology at some point? King Charles, one of the first things you should do.
You're trying very hard to get me to say something undiplomatic.
I'm trying. Okay.
You know what I'm going to do? You remember Mohinder Ramanathan? One of the best batsmen, right?
I told you about culture and
And a
education.
good thing
I
about
gave you the
when there's a ball on the offside, you just, well left.
Well left. Okay. Let's look at it historically, though. Let's set the diplomacy apart. Looking at it historically, though, fundamentally, what I'm saying is that essentially correct when you think about the monarchy? Picture the time when William Rowe first came to the court of Jahangir, came to the Mughal court, representing, the monarch of Britain, coming to the court of the Mughals in India, wasn't an equal, fair comparison. He came as am I correct in saying there was no match between their respective paths at that time?
Let me, if you read the diaries and the works of Rowe, he wasn't actually too impressed, because he thought there was a lot of wealth, but he thought there was a lot of laziness and debauchery. And the way I would look at it is, at the peak of the empire, there were probably around 100 to 150,000 British ruling 350 million Indians. Okay, for 200 years.
Yeah.
This is not just conquest, this is humiliation. That is unparalleled, right, in human history. Now, we need to think about why that happened and learn our lessons,
That's
so,
true.
for example, if the elite or the ones running the country are distracted, debauched, decadent, it's not good news for the country, right? There is no doubt that the British managed to rule India because many Indians actually collaborated with the British. That's a sad reality. So that's another thing we Indians have to learn, that whenever we've been disunited, it hasn't worked out well for us. Usually we didn't need enemies to defeat us. We defeated ourselves, right? Because of our lack of unity. So maybe there are some lessons we can draw, right, from what I would try to look at it that way rather than hating someone today for what their ancestors did 300 years ago. That's not. How does that help me?
Okay.
Right? But can we draw lessons which we can implement now?
That's not just diplomatic, that's also very wise. And I completely agree with you. And I think that's right. There's no point in dwelling too much on history.
We should learn from it.
We should remember
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
We should learn from it.
Yeah.
We should say, okay, this is what happened 75 years ago. This is what happened before that. Now we got to move on.
Forgive
So,
but don't forget.
forgive, but don't forget. That's
Yeah.
another really good phrase that I think we should remember. Now, looking ahead, you had Great Britain. There would be people who would argue, correctly in my view, that a lot of the things that made, look at all of these.
Yeah.
Look at that statue, 1769 to 1852. Machine Gun Corps,
Yeah.
the people who died in the Machine
Great
Gun
War,
Corps,
yeah.
Nike behind it.
Yeah.
That statue out there of that particular campaign. These are all Indian soldiers. There were Indian soldiers who died. Many
yes,
of these were Indian
many.
soldiers who
Yeah,
died here.
yeah.
The money that paid for
Many.
many of these campaigns was
Yeah.
Indian money.
Yeah.
So a lot of what made Great Britain great was actually India. India did contribute to that. Now, as you rightly said, India has overtaken again Britain when it comes to economic size. How do you see the relationship proceeding going forward? Because cultural ties and that affinity is still there.
Look, it's like this. I think over the next 5 to 10 years, there will be a recalibration, right? Not just with the UK, with Indian relationships with many countries across the world, right? It is in India's interest to manage this recalibration as smoothly as possible, but there will be a recalibration. And it will be in the interests of many other countries to recalibrate as well, because India will be a profitable relationship for them. Right? And one of the things even as an Indian, I'm not a British Indian, I'm Indian, right? But even as an Indian, I had huge respect for Queen Elizabeth. Not because she was the Queen, because of the way she conducted herself, her character, her bearing. That was as Indians would say, very kabile tarif. It was very positive the way she conducted herself. I think among the things she helped the UK in was actually the end of the empire and a recalibration of UK's relationship with the world. Many empires, when they lose their power, tend to, they don't necessarily adapt to it. They go out swinging.
Yeah.
And like what happened to the German Empire, and then they suffer for it. Whereas Queen Elizabeth kind of helped guide the UK into a new status, right? And relatively smoothly.
Yeah.
And that perhaps is a challenge that King Charles will also have.
He'll have other challenges. I mean, that for example, commemorates New Zealand and some of the soldiers, some of the contribution there. In New Zealand and Australia, the debate is also continuing about whether they should be republics. In India, I'm sure the debate will continue about whether we should be part of the Commonwealth. It doesn't hurt, but what does it really do, sort of a thing. Your areas, education and culture, is that where you think one of the major foundations for the relationship with Britain will grow?
Yeah, no doubt. The UK can be our bridgehead into pushing the Indian narrative across the larger world. The Anglophone culture, which is essentially the 5 English-speaking countries, UK, US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, they still
I can add India to that, I guess.
But we're not Anglophone.
We're not Anglophone,
we are our
people
own.
speaking
Yeah, we
English.
are our own. We may have, but we are our own culture. We're not a part of their culture. But the Anglophone countries still have tremendous cultural power across the world, even now. And there are 5 great cities which actually define what the Anglophone culture is, what they think, what their cultural memes are, which is essentially New York, London, DC, LA, San Francisco. A play in New York will be more influential across the world than a play that can earn far more money in Mumbai, right? Hamilton, for example, right?
Yeah.
Why? Because it's the cultural power of New York. London has that cultural power. And India can actually impact the world's narrative through London. That's the way I see it. So culturally, London can be a wonderful partner. Educationally, you're right, we get 120,000 Indian students coming here every year. That's a lot of money that we are spending out here. And yes, they're getting the benefits of education, but the cost of living crisis out here makes it that much more expensive for Indian students. So the Indian government has opened the space for foreign universities, including British universities, to come to India. We're trying to encourage them on that.
I think that's a theme on which I want to get you. I'm going to cut back to you. And I think it's a story that deserves a program by itself, talking about what India can do in its education front. Amish, such a pleasure. Such a pleasure as always talking to you. Let's enjoy the coronation, celebrate it, and congratulate and wish King Charles all the best. Remember history. Don't forget it.
Yeah.
But you should
But
forgive.
forgive.
But forgive. Okay. That's really good lessons from us. Thank you so much. Pleasure as always.
Take care.
Well, look, as we've been saying, 70 years have passed since the last coronation. What sort of a monarch is King Charles going to be making? And from India's point of view, what will be the views that King Charles will espouse on some of the matters that are of particular interest to India? We heard about Amish talking about some of them. Here's our own analysis of why Charles could be a slightly different monarch.
The King's relationship with India dates back to 1975, when Charles first visited the country. Since then, as heir to the British throne, Charles has visited India 10 times. He has also made 2 official visits on behalf of the Queen in 1991 for the funeral of assassinated Indian Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi, and in 2010 to inaugurate that year's edition of the Commonwealth Games in New Delhi. But his connection with India goes back to his school days in Scotland. Shomi Das, former principal of the Lawrence School, Sanawar, and Doon School, was his tutor. The last viceroy to India, Lord Mountbatten, also significantly influenced the young royal. Prince Charles and Princess Diana's first visit to the country revealed a strained marriage. The 1992 photograph of Diana seated in front of the Taj while the prince was in Hyderabad has become one of the most iconic images captured at the monument. Over the years, Charles developed close relations with many cities in India. A memorable event was his interaction with Mumbai's famous Dabbawalas back in 2003. He was curious about how they ride bicycles, lift crates full of tiffins and provide them to many people punctually. In 2005, 2 Dabbawalas attended the royal wedding of Charles and Camilla Parker Bowles. The Dabbawalas have also been invited to attend the coronation ceremony of the 74-year-old monarch. He and his present queen consort Camilla also have a Bengaluru connection. Dr. Isaac Mathai has been the holistic physician of the royal couple for the past 15 years. Charles celebrated his 71st birthday with school children at the iconic Taj Mahal Hotel in Mumbai in November of 2019. Charles even hosted Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi in April of 2018 at the Science Museum in London to establish a first-of-its-kind global network for evidence-based research on yoga and Ayurveda. He also spoke of his great love for India when he launched an emergency COVID appeal in 2021 and helped raise millions for India. Over the decades, Charles has developed a warm relationship with India, but not without some controversies. Before his 10th visit in 2019 to pacify the Sikhs, Charles sent good wishes to them across Britain and the Commonwealth on the 550th birth anniversary of the religion's founder, Guru Nanak. He paid obeisance at a Gurudwara and interacted with the Sikhs in Delhi. Wearing a white headdress and sporting a set of orange and white scarves around his neck, he even tried his hand at cooking rotis. Recently, ahead of the coronation, Buckingham Palace averted an international row by declaring that the Queen Consort's coronation crown will not incorporate the Kohinoor diamond. The famous diamond came into Queen Victoria's possession from the treasury of Indian King Maharaja Ranjit Singh a few years before she was to be crowned Empress of India. Historians and common people alike have been asking questions about how the diamond was acquired by the Queen in the first place. Just last year, barely hours after Queen's death, Indian social media had renewed calls to return the famous 106-carat diamond, which has become part of the British crown jewels and has played a starring role in British coronations of the past.
Andrew? What's your sense on that? Is Charles going to be a different monarch to Queen Elizabeth when it comes to some of these issues?
I think he will be a little bit more informal, a little bit more accessible, but I don't expect any dramatic change. We know from his time as Prince of Wales that he has a real passion for the environment, for organic farming. The Prince's Trust, which he set up, has got a really impressive record in tackling issues such as urban devastation. But he's also said once he becomes monarch, he will not be lobbying for any particular cause because he can't. I mean, that's the way our constitutional monarchy works. The king is head of state, but they don't get involved in policy decisions. They don't get involved directly in governance.
But so in his relations with, countries like India, or for that matter with countries in the Commonwealth, I mean, I know that both the Australians and the New Zealand prime ministers, although they are Republicans, are still here. They're all pledging allegiance, to King Charles. Would he have a different attitude, you think, to a country like to India and to relations and his priority on that?
I
Not that it really matters, I guess, in a sense.
I think that's the point. It doesn't really matter. So I'm sure he will visit India. Of course he will, and so will his Queen. And I'm sure they will get a very warm response. I mean, because India, I think, enjoys hosting monarchs, and it will have, as the coronation has, a touch of spectacle about
So
it.
they know. One change has already come. I see the Kohinoor. I'm going on looking at that, right? The Kohinoor is not actually in the part of the ceremony for once.
Well, I think that's William Dalrymple to blame for that, I think. And,
I'm about to ask him that question.
But actually, I mean, what that is about is King Charles didn't want any controversy which might in any way overshadow or besmirch or cast a shadow on his coronation. So the instruction was, we'll leave the Kohinoor there. There are lots of other diamonds and lots of other crowns.
Yeah. It's all actually almost fascinating. You ask so many Indians about Britain or the British Raj and all that's happened. I'm talking about anecdotal conversations with people. There were 200 years of rule. Trillions of pounds probably moved from India to Britain over a period of time. India went from one of the richest countries in the world to one of the poorest. Well, richest, I mean, in terms of GDP, to far lower than that. But if you ask the average person in India, what do you think about the British Raj? It often comes down to that building behind me, the Tower of London, and to one single diamond which is inside there, which is the Kohinoor. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about, right? There have been Bollywood films that have been made about going in there and trying to get the Kohinoor out of there in some form or the other. I don't think that's necessarily happening very soon, but why this entire fascination with the Kohinoor? Let's just take a look at that story.
Kohinoor, or Mountain of Light, one of the biggest and most famous diamonds in the world. Shining bright for centuries, but casting a dark shadow on the pages of history. This gem is in the headlines once again because of the coronation of UK's King Charles III. The Kohinoor is part of the British Crown jewels. But how it got there has been a matter of controversy, and whether it should be returned to India is an even bigger one. Now, as the famous jewel gets passed on to the new monarchs, here's a look at its stormy past, speculative future, and at present, how it symbolizes the continuing dark legacy of British colonialism. There are many hypotheses about the origin of the Kohinoor diamond, but they all agree that it was in India. As per some accounts, such a gem was first described in Sanskrit texts as early as 3200 BC. But this is a contested claim. Some say that the jewel was taken by Alauddin Khalji from the Raja of Malwa in 1304. Others claim that it was given to Babur's son by the Raja of Gwalior after the Battle of Panipat in 1526. Yet others say that it came from a Kolur mine and was presented to Shah Jahan in 1656. Another controversial theory is that it was cut from the great Mughal diamond found in the Golconda mines in 1650. So how did it fall into the hands of the British? In the 1630s, it was part of Shah Jahan's throne along with the Timur ruby. In 1739, the diamond was taken by Nadir Shah when he invaded Delhi. Around a decade later, when Nadir Shah died, the gem was taken by his general Ahmad Shah. In 1813, Ahmad's descendants surrendered the Kohinoor to the Sikh ruler Ranjit Singh. In 1849, around 10 years after Ranjit Singh's death, the diamond was forcefully taken by the British from the Sikh king's 10-year-old son Duleep. In 1852, the Kohinoor was recut by the British royal jeweller to enhance its brilliance. In 1937, the jewel was added to the front of the crown worn by Queen Elizabeth II's mother. In 2002, the gem made its last public appearance at the funeral of the Queen Mother. The Kohinoor may be the most famous, but it is far from being the only treasure stolen by British colonialists. Tipu's tiger, a wooden automation with movement and noise mechanisms, was taken by the East India Company in 1799. The Sultanganj Buddha, the largest known early medieval cast metal sculpture, was taken to the UK in the 1860s. The Amravati marbles are sculptures taken from the Amravati Stupa in the 18th century. Then there are the Elgin marbles, ancient Greek sculptural panels taken by Lord Elgin from Athens in the 1800s. The Rosetta Stone, key to understanding ancient Egypt, was taken by the French, who lost it to the British in 1815. There are also the Maui megalithic statues taken from Easter Island in the 1860s. Some UK institutions have begun to return some valuable objects, including the famous Benin bronzes from Nigeria and some Magdala artifacts taken from Ethiopia. But many more continue to remain hostage in the UK. Regarding the Kohinoor diamond, the Indian government has said that it raises the matter periodically with the British to look for a satisfactory resolution. But the UK has been more emphatic with its words. In 2010, then Prime Minister David Cameron said that if London says yes to returning the Kohinoor, then suddenly the British Museum would be empty. Given the diamond's controversial history, King Charles III has decided not to have the Kohinoor at his coronation. But will hiding the treasure silence demands for righting historical wrongs? Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Well, who better to talk about the Kohinoor and all the aspects around it than William Dalrymple, who's actually, for some reason, William, not sitting here in London, but is sitting in a nice house in Delhi, telling us about the entire coronation. William, before I jump to the Kohinoor, you're watching all this spectacle. It's actually the first coronation in all of our lifetimes. How do you see the excitement and all the buzz and all the fuss that there is around this?
Well, I'm sitting in Delhi, and there's no excitement and no buzz. You're the one in London, Vikram. So,
oh, come on, William, that's not entirely fair. I'm sure there's some fuss that is happening in Delhi as well, not just here in London.
I mean, I was very struck when I first came to Delhi in the mid-'80s, how far India had shed its imperial baggage. You know, I came at a time when the British were just sort of rediscovering imperial nostalgia, watching Gandhi and the Jewel in the Crown and all those programs that now seem like ancient history. And even then, even in the mid-'80s, when there was only, I suppose, 40 years of independence, already British rule seemed as distant then as the Romans' rule in Britain did. You know, it seemed like ancient history. Today, it's not even in the same millennia. It seems almost impossible to imagine the British ever did rule India, and that it was only 75 years ago is extraordinary to me.
Obviously, there is a relationship of some sort, right? That's why Britain still matters. There's a history, and there's still a existing relationship of some sort. Not least the fact you've got a person of Indian origin as the Prime Minister out here, and somebody of Pakistani origin up in Scotland. There's a relationship.
Well, I think it's very interesting. I mean, apparently Britain is the largest foreign investor in India still. And yet, it was, I think, the 30 or 35th country that Modi visited after he became prime minister. The British are way down on his priorities, and he's shown no fondness at all for the country. In fact, he's gone out of his way to remove all remaining traces of imperial vestiges in Delhi, like the renaming of Rajpath and the placing of Netaji in the Chhatri, all that sort of thing. I think there are a lot of Indians in Britain. India and Britain have a great deal of business to do together, and it can be a very productive relationship. And if you think of all the Indian writers who are published out of London, there's still a huge amount of intellectual and academic traffic between the two, and yet diplomatically, it seems that there's amazingly little warmth or contact. I'm always surprised that, in the sense that that Britain doesn't have more of a say in modern Indian politics.
So yes, there is certainly that distance, William. I think you're right when it comes to that country to country, the government to government level. But perhaps there's the question of the diaspora. There's a very large diaspora, lots of linkages there, and maybe that will become the binding factor as we go forward, the diaspora.
For example, the way that the three most right-wing characters we've had in government, really, and as far as sort of immigration are concerned, probably Suella Braverman, Rishi Sunak, and Priti Patel. The Indians are further to the right of immigration than any of the Goras.
All right, William, lots of other subjects to talk about, but let's now talk about the Kohinoor in that building, the Tower of London right there behind me, because it's interesting how, for so many Indians, that's the number one subject that they keep talking about when it comes to being out here. Now, the Kohinoor has played a part in coronations in the past, but this time is likely to be somewhat different.
Well, the Kohinoor is an interesting story because there's a huge mythology around it. The hard facts are actually amazingly few and far between. Most people in India believe that it was found in Golconda, that it was the eye of an idol, that it went through a succession of plundering Islamic hands and various invaders until it reached Delhi. In reality, there's not a single reference that's 100% certain to that diamond before 1739, when Nadir Shah took it, and we have the first reference to in Herat, where it had been taken by Nadir Shah when it was still on the top of the peacock throne. And all these stories about eyes of idols and all this stuff is in fact imperial myth-making. The Lord Dalhousie, who was responsible for taking it from Dulip Singh at the point of a bayonet in 1839, commissioned a report which I've seen in the Indian National Archives. And that's where all these stories begin. And they are just that, stories. They are the stories of the jewelers in Chandni Chowk and the old Begums of the Red Fort told in 1839, 100 years after the stone had left Delhi. And so facts are few and far between, but the reality is that it became a symbol for the British of their sort of imperial triumph, and they put it at the center of the Great Exhibition in 1851, and that was the moment that, in a sense, it became identified with empire. It became literally the jewel in the crown. And so post-colonially, in reverse, it's become the symbol of imperial loss. It's everything that India lost to Britain, everything that was plundered, everything that was taken, everything that was removed. And this tiny stone, and it is small now, it's not even in the top 100 of diamonds. It's the size of an egg, while it's in a case in the Tower of London normally, sitting beside the Cullinan, that's the size of a football.
Yeah, as I said, it's a very popular part of Indian culture. There's even a movie about how someone can come in and swipe the Kohinoor from that building behind me.
I think again, there's things that got sort of slightly out of hand in the sense that I think a lot of people in India think it's on its way home almost, that it's nearly there. That the first thing that happened when the Queen died was everyone said, "Is the Kohinoor coming home now?" I think the reality is that the British haven't even woken up to realizing the scale of feeling in India about this. The British, you've always got to remember, are not taught their imperial history. They know nothing about Jallianwala Bagh and all the imperial horror stories that you guys grow up on. And there's great ignorance about where things like the Kohinoor came from, or indeed the entire contents of the British Museum. And gradually, there is now a process of education. There's a lot of people writing books. There's, Shashi's famous Oxford Union debate went viral among Brits as well as among Indians. There've been a lot of books, like my own book on the Kohinoor. I have a podcast called Empire, which has 6 million downloads a week now. It's extraordinary. This is a subject which people are waking up to. But it's still very early days, and most British people, I think, would be astonished to hear that India thinks it's going to get the Kohinoor back.
All right, William, the empire is not coming back anytime soon. The empire could be striking back in some form or the other. And from what you're saying, the Kohinoor is not likely to be coming back anytime soon either. But not going to be a part of the coronation, not part of the coronation. So some differences, some sensitivity there, some difference.
Well, I think that's very interesting. And I think what it shows, funnily enough, is that Prince Charles is far more sensitive to this than the Tory government. The Tory government, including all these very right-wing East African Indians who are now in the cabinet, who are busy. I mean, Suella Braverman is a huge supporter of the British Empire. Bizarrely, you find the Indians waving the flag more, perhaps perhaps it's important in a sense for them to do that, and it's something that an act they have to play. But I think there's a feeling that some of the rhetoric we've been getting is genuine out of them, I think there's a long way to go before this diamond really enters the national conversation in Britain, and we have a point where people really seriously can begin thinking about sending it back. Then there's the whole question of who to send it to, because of course, there's the Pakistanis claim it, the Bangladeshis claim it, the Iranians claim it, the Afghans claim it, and the Taliban claim it. And so there's and I mean, those are not sort of minor claims. The Pakistanis were the first to get in a claim in, I think, 1963, that Jim Callaghan, Bhutto, or was it 1973? They put in a claim. At the moment that Afghanistan fell to the Taliban, there are all those pictures of Ashraf Ghani's office with the Taliban on his desk. Behind the desk is a picture of Ahmad Shah Durrani with the Koh-i-Noor. And so it's a central part of Afghan myth too. Then there's Nadir Shah and the Iranians. So it's a long and complicated history.
All right, William, last word from you. Now, you have that podcast. 6 million people are downloading it every week on the empire. Obviously, still a subject of considerable interest. What should we be thinking about when it comes to the empire itself?
Well, I think the empire is long gone. There's no, I don't think anyone in Britain thinks they really have an empire. I think the coronation is about a new king. He's our head of state in Britain. He's on our stamps and on our notes. And I think it's very much an internal British thing now. I don't think anyone's sitting there thinking that the King Charles is going to revive the empire, or that story is long gone. And as we all know, this is now the age of the rise of Asia, and China and India are the empires of the future.
The empires of the future. That's an interesting line, William, which we're going to take from you from here. Thank you so much, William Dalrymple, for joining us. All right, as we end this, let's come to a subject that many people have been talking about here in Britain. It's going to be the last coronation. Is King Charles going to be the last monarch? Where does the monarchy go? We put together this little package analyzing that entire aspect.
A 3-day-long celebration with a budget of at least £100 million or 1,000 crore rupees. While the country struggles with an economic crisis, decades-high inflation and strikes by desperate workers, almost every news article on Charles's coronation insists that the king wants a scaled-back event as a symbol of a slimmed-down monarchy. But critics of the UK monarchy are using the coronation as an example of why the country needs to get rid of unelected, entitled leaders. Will Charles III's ascension to the throne mark the beginning of royalty's decline in the United Kingdom? The coronation extravaganza appears to have sparked loud grumblings among the people.
That we will tackle some of the
According to a recent survey in the UK, 51% of adults were against the government providing funds for the coronation. Just 32% supported state funding for the event. But this doesn't mean that there is no sympathy and support for the monarchy. When adults were asked whether the country should have an elected head of state, 58% of the respondents said no, while only 26% said yes. But the share of those who want the monarchy abolished is much higher among young adults, and eyeing these citizens, extensive protests against the royal family have been planned during the coronation. Around 1,000 people dressed in yellow shirts are expected to line the streets and chant "Not my king" when Charles passes in his gold coach.
Not my king! Not my king!
These demonstrations are being organized by Republic, an organization founded in 1983 to push for abolition of the monarchy. They have become more hopeful since the death of Queen Elizabeth II in 2022, as widespread respect for her had muted calls for reform. The tussle between republicanism and monarchy is not limited to the United Kingdom. King Charles III is king of 14 other realms of the Commonwealth, a group of nations which were ruled by the colonial British Empire. And calls for full freedom are growing louder in many of them. Barbados removed the British monarch as head of state in November 2021. Australia has appointed a minister for a potential transition to republicanism. Additionally, the government chose to not have Charles's image on $5 notes, unlike Elizabeth. In Canada, a survey conducted after the Queen's death said that only 34% want Charles as head of state. New Zealand Prime Minister Chris Hipkins said he supports the idea of having an elected head of state, but it's not an urgent priority. Jamaica's government in 2022 said that the process of becoming a republic had been set in motion. The Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda in 2022 said that a referendum on the issue will be held within 3 years. Belize has also announced its intention to remove the British monarch as head of state. For those who support the monarchy, especially in the UK, claim that it represents stability in an ever-changing world. More practically, the royals attract tourism, they claim. But the critics cite political morals as well as the huge cost that taxpayers bear, even as the royal family keeps its wealth, possibly worth billions of pounds, hidden. Facing such deep divisions, Charles III's legacy as king might be defined by whether he is able to convince his country that he and his family are still relevant. Bureau Report, we are World is One.
All right, Andrew, as we look, final word on the coronation. Is this going to be the last coronation, you think, or no? Because as we were discussing earlier, William is very popular.
I don't think this will be the last coronation, but I'm not absolutely sure. So I think, to some extent at least, the jury's out.
Last could be the jury's out. Okay, it's a great spectacle. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us. Pleasure. Let's see what actually happens on that. Well, we're going to continue to track a lot of the other aspects of what is happening in Britain. The diaspora is playing a very important part out here. So India Story is going to continue to roll out from here. We'll be coming to you from London once again next week. So do remember to tune in for that. This is Vikram Chandra signing off for now. Thanks, Andrew.